I was leader of the opposition when the National Energy Program was introduced. And first of all, it was a bad program. It was badly thought through. Not all of its goals were bad, but the way it was introduced and designed was bad. And it became a very sharp symbol in Western Canada, Alberta particularly, of their national government not understanding what their industry was about. And that was almost all true. However, in order to fight it, and we could not stop it from being passed in the end, but we delayed it a long time. In order to fight it, we couldn't do it alone with the Alberta members of Parliament, even in our own party, because this was seen in the national media as an issue in which there were interests in the West and there were interests in Ontario, and they were in conflict. We had to find some ways in which our Ontario members of Parliament, who went back to their constituents, just as I went back to Yellowhead or to Rocky Mountain, would be able to bring their communities along. It wasn't just a question of winning their votes. It was a question of being able to persuade their communities. So we couldn't make the case simply that this is unfair to Alberta, because people would say, well, look at all the things that have been unfair to Ontario or Quebec or wherever in the past. And you can argue with that, but you can't get over the unfairness, the emotion of unfairness. So what we did was sit down and take a look at Ontario-based suppliers to Alberta-based companies. And we went in, and our members of Parliament went in and made the case to them, how would this hurt your industry? And within short order, with the help of the Ontario members of Parliament, we were able to make a case why this was bad for Ontario too, and that then allowed us to solidify an opposition caucus that could proceed on a united front in the House of Commons. And the reason that's important is that if you're a government and you're under attack by an opposition, you always try to find a weak link. And you can say, well, these guys who have no power except their voice, they don't even all sing from the same hymn book. And we were in, when the members of my caucus who were really upset about the NEP when it started were the Alberta members of my caucus, like the rest of but we didn't have the luxury of simply being angry. We had to find some way in which we could draw others in so that we could find ground upon which we could hold up and hopefully defeat this initiative. We didn't defeat it. We replaced it when we became the government, but we held it up, and we demonstrated that there was that one, governments couldn't get away with these kinds of things with impunity. That was a time when Parliament was very effective. But secondly, I think we indicated to a lot of the really desperate but more moderate Albertans that while the national government part of their country had not served them well, the national parliament part of their country was doing its best. And I think that's one of the lessons you learn about a country like this, is that you can't have it all on. An interesting thing happened in a caucus on an entirely other issue. This is really about Canadian political parties. But one of the strongest Alberta members of Parliament probably ever was Jack Horner, who was Jack and I were often in adversarial roles. And he had very strong views. Something came up once, I forget even the issue, except I think it had to do with feed grains. And we were in opposition, and we were going to make this case. And Roch LaSalle, a member of Parliament from Quebec, who spoke very little English, suddenly realized what was up, and he talked to somebody who spoke some French and said this would be difficult in Quebec. And they got up and said that in caucus. And Jack said, well, I don't know the Quebec argument, but what I do know is that Roch LaSalle keeps getting elected there. So he must know something I don't know. So if this is going to hurt him, we won't push it through. Now, people who have a caricature of Jack Horner would say, that couldn't have happened. I was there. I saw it happen. And what it it's part of a sort of a question of seeing bigger pictures. And I guess for better, I've been lucky enough to spend my life coming from a wonderful place, but working in a wonderful place that has to have a somewhat larger, on some issues, point of view. And the only way you are able to function is if you can look for first and find that common ground. Jack's response was the best of a Canadian parliamentarian. I mean, and he'd been in Parliament for some time. He'd lost a lot of battles, and he'd won some. But he understood something essential. My reaction our reaction, but I was the leader, in the National Energy Program was that we had to build that. We had to go out and find allies who could make a broad enough case that it might have more impact than a case made only by ourselves. And eventually, when the government changed, we were able to change the National Energy Program at great psychic cost to the country. I mean, I think two things happened in that era that did real damage psychologically to Canada. One was constitutional change without the Agreement of Quebec. The other was the manner of the imposition of the National Energy Program. And I don't ascribe to any views that there were sort of terrible motives at play. I think there was some arrogance and a lack of understanding of realities or respect for them. But they left deep wounds in the country, and all those wounds have had consequences. Those two factors created the current House of Commons. They created the radical, the West needs to get in because we don't have any influence unless we're in charge idea. And they created the Bloc Québécois. And those are the consequences, the deep psychic scars of those two pieces of national policy that didn't reflect the nation, in my view. Who was right, who was wrong? What matters is that a decision was taken that was really important to the region of the country that was negatively affected, and nobody paid attention. And they weren't taken seriously. Their country didn't take them seriously on a critical issue. And that doesn't happen very often, but it happened in those two cases.